theme. So you should have read about themes for today. I'm going to talk about themes a little bit with you. But this week, we're also going to be working a little bit more with critical lenses. Last week, you should have read about 3 different critical lenses, and there are 2 more this week. And it's super important that you understand the critical lenses because your paper relies on them. And I'm going to go through the whole, specs for the paper in a little bit here. Updates. Hybrid already talked about that. Seniors. Those of you who were in the seminar last week with the counselor, do make sure that you're accessing their website. They have a lot of information. They went through it really quickly, but everybody's trying to reach out and help you through your process that you need to do this year. I'm going to do my part by helping you with your essay. So those of you who are seniors, if you're working on your college admissions essay and you need some help, there's 2 ways I'm going to help you. One is that I created a seminar where I have a whole bunch, it's a slideshow, and I have a whole bunch of little videos that I made to walk you through the process and to help you sort of conceptualize the essay and think about it. That's here. And the other way is that if you want some feedback on your admissions essay, if you have hit a brick wall, you have writer's block, you don't like your essay, etc., then you can get some feedback from me. You can share a document with me and I can give you feedback. You can also, we can set up a little Zoom meeting and go through what you have, or if you're stuck and you're having trouble getting started, I can help you. Also in the seminar, there are things to get you started too. So the way the seminar works is sort of a, at your own pace sort of thing. You can either go through each section one by one, or you can go to the contents and jump around. I've been to a lot of different seminars about helping students with the college admissions essay in a lot of different places, and I've been doing it for about 20 years. So we've been helping kids get into their colleges for a long time, and I put my best advice into this for you. So you can jump around if you want to, or you can just take it a little by little, and you'll see that I put videos in here in different spots to help you where I'm coaching you through the process. So I set all that up so that, I don't really like when they do those thumbnails because I always have my mouth open and I'm always making a face, but anyway, so you can go through these topics, or there's also some examples from my own experience over here. So there are some, I'm trying to get past this thing right here. Some examples. I've been collecting essays for a while from my students, so I have a whole bunch that you can look at as examples here. And I organized them by topic. So there are a bunch of ones in here. So if you need a little help with your college admissions essay, you can start there, or you can also just touch base with me and I can help you get started, or I can proofread and give you feedback, whatever is necessary. Those essays are super important. I mean, I know juniors, it's not super crucial for you right now, but it's kind of good to get a feel for next year. The essays are used also for scholarships in a lot of universities. So you're not just writing an essay to get into the school. Sometimes kids in the top 10 will be like, oh, I'm gonna get in anyway. Sometimes they use the same application for the program that you're applying to. So like getting into the engineering school, it's not the same thing. Your top 10% gets you into the university, but not into your program. So that's a separate application process. So the essays that you write, especially now that the test scores are optional in most schools, the essay is going to be even more crucial. So I'm not trying to stress you out, but let me know if you need help with that. Hopefully those 2 things will be beneficial for you. All right, let's move on to the stuff for today. There's a formative today. This is a B week, so you've got 3 formatives this week. The formatives are important to do. They're kind of holding the place of discussion and quizzes and other things that I would do, journals that I would do over on Blackboard. So I've just sort of combined them into the formatives. These questions probably would have been asked of you anyway. It's just that the formative is a way for me to do the attendance. But do keep up with them. Some of you are doing an excellent job with your formatives. I'm impressed with your ideas. I am giving feedback on those regularly, so look to see my comments and that sort of thing. There'll be another grade. I put in a grade before progress reports for formatives. There will be another grade for formatives right before the report card in a couple weeks. So if your grade isn't what you want in the formatives, strive to improve your points. And there are examples on there that can help you. All right, let's talk about critical lenses. This week you were supposed to look over the PowerPoints for the 3 critical lenses that were starting us out. What I'd like to do is kind of bring each one up on the screen. I know that you've already read them and you've already made notes, so I don't want to go through the slides. I don't like it when people just read through slides in front of me. I can read. But I do want to talk about each one, and then I want to open it up in case you have questions or you want me to talk in more depth about something from one of the slides. So I want to go through them with you. I want this thing to go back up here. I don't know why my thing's at the bottom there. Maybe I have to put it up there like that. Okay, so the first one is an easy one. The first one is reader response. And the reason that I say this is easy is because I think you've been doing it in your classes without knowing what it was called. I feel like this is the sort of thing that we do a lot in middle school and in high school to get students to interact with literature. So the reader response lens is where we assume that in order for literature to work, there are 2 partners: the writer who is projecting the idea and the reader who is receiving the idea. It's sort of like a phone call, right? A phone call isn't really a phone call unless there are 2 people communicating. So in reader response, it's about how the author is creating characters and making situations and conflicts and messages to us, and the reader is receiving them. And everybody's a different person. So the reader response is super important in that relationship because the reader creates the meaning. The author puts it out there, but until somebody comes to it and makes meaning, then it's just there. So reader response is the idea that you can have your own reactions to the things that you read, and your own background will inform that. The way that each one of these slide presentations is set up is that there are some assumptions, some questions, and then some references for further study. There are also some pages in the textbook. Maybe I'll go back and put them into the Blackboard entries so that you can also find them in the textbook more easily. Are there any questions about reader response or anything that's on the slides that I can go into more detail about for you?
I don't think so, Miss.
Okay. All right, then the next one, I think that one's pretty self-explanatory. The next one is the archetypal perspective. I don't know why it's doing that, but as long as you can access that, that's okay. So an archetype is like a symbolic character, a character that's like a stereotype. And we ran into that when we were looking at characterization, and so in the text. So that word should not be new to you, but the archetypal perspective might be new to you. So this is a way of looking at literature through a lens where we say, you know what, this is a character that shows up across cultures, across time periods. This, you know, like the trickster is one. Another one is like the nosy mother-in-law. You'd be surprised how many nosy mother-in-law stories there are in all kinds of literature from all kinds of cultures and languages. So it says something about our humanity and our similarities if we can say that there are these same types of characters that show up throughout literature. So when we're looking through the archetypal lens, we're looking to see what are the character traits that are pretty common to this type of character. Oh, here's the damsel in distress. She needs some guy to save her. Her name's different, her hair's different, the situation's a little different, but I know how she's going to act. I can predict how things are going to happen. And I think this is where we get a little bit into the summer reading book, because some of those instincts that we have depends on how much we've read. How are you going to know that it's an archetype if you haven't read widely, you're not going to know that that's an archetype. But if you think about it in terms of movies or TV shows, you can see archetypes pretty quickly, right? You can see, Big Bang Theory, there's the nerds, and then there's the, like ditzy blonde girl. All those are archetypes, and we already know how she's going to behave in a situation. We already know how those nerds are going to behave in a situation. So those are all archetypes that lots of narratives play on. If you've ever been to the movies and you can figure out the plot, Mr. Ramos and I do this all the time because we know so many stories from reading literature that, I can already tell you what's probably going to happen. I like the movies best that surprise me, but there aren't too many like that. So the archetypal perspective is one where we see these similar characters and we can look over and make a judgment about the human experience. Are there any questions about this lens? What are the things you want me to talk about a little bit more?
I think we're good, Miss.
Okay. All right. Am I taking too long in between? It's just because sometimes people take a minute to unmute. So I'm just trying to be considerate and make sure that, when you're working on your paper and you have to use these lenses, I want to make sure you've got a good understanding of them because you're going to have to use them for your paper.
Okay.
All right. New historicism is the last one from this week. And this one, we've talked about it a little bit. The idea with new historicism is that we have to use the lens of the time period, right? We can't take our 20th century viewpoint and perspective and put that on somebody who was writing in the 1700s or the 1800s. We can't look at, yellow wallpaper, for example, and say, oh, it's horrible how her husband treated her, because that story was written where women didn't even have the right to vote. They couldn't open bank accounts themselves. They couldn't own land by themselves. So when we say, oh, he's treating her unfairly, maybe to our standards that's true, but it says something about the historical time period when the story was written. So new historicism says that you can only sort of analyze a work based on its original context, the time period when it was written. We have to understand that certain historical time periods had different viewpoints than we do today. It's not fair to put our current standards on characters and authors who were writing long ago. So new historicism is a viewpoint that says, let me try to think like a person from the 18th century. And what I know about history overlaps here, and I can use what I know about history to try to understand this character. So this is an example of, a lot of times people are like, well, when am I ever going to use that piece of history? Well, now you are, because if you know about the Victorian era or industrialism, then you know that certain things affected the time period and they affected the writers. And so, because they lived then. So we have to take those things into account in new historicism. All right. Some of those things are outdated now. Sometimes we cringe when we see things in texts that are really old because we would never say that today. I had a student last year in dual, and it was kind of like a little bit of a battle because I was trying to teach this student that you should not use the word colored to refer to a Black person. And her defense was, well, it's in all the literature that we're reading. I'm like, well, yeah, because that was written in 1935. And so back then, that was how Black people were referred to, but we don't do that today. Today, we, call people African Americans or Black. So if you read it, it doesn't mean you get to use it. It could just be historically accurate. There were people who wanted to make a clean version of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And by clean, I mean without the N-word, because the N-word is present in that story quite a bit in that novel. So there's like two camps of thought, right? One, the new historicists say, wait a minute. just because a word is not used today or is offensive today doesn't mean that we shouldn't understand the context in which it was used in the past. So they came out with a version of Huckleberry Finn where they changed the N-word throughout the entire book because people were protesting it and saying, oh, we can't read this in schools and that kind of thing. So new historicism comes into play there. This concept also comes into play in history books. I mean, they're always deciding when they're making a new history book what is appropriate to put into that book. What you can't put everything that happened in history. So what are we leaving in and what are we taking out? And the context tells us that. There's a chat. That's not epic. No, it's not. I think you're talking about that. All right, questions on new historicism? Anything you want me to go over? Okay, so the ones that I want you to do for this week, there are 2 more, so that you have a total of 5. The paper that you're going to write is going to give you a choice of 7 stories and then the choice of the 5 critical lenses. The 2 that you're going to do this week, and I kept the assignments kind of slim this week. I didn't add anything from the textbook to read, no stories. We're kind of wrapping up with our short fiction. I didn't assign a chapter from the textbook because I want you to get started on the paper this week. But I do want you to study 2 more critical lenses, the feminist perspective, which has, sometimes they just call that the gender perspective, and the Marxist social, or sometimes they call it the economic lens. So that you should have a total of understanding of 5 lenses before you go in to write the paper. Now, does every lens apply to every work? No. There are some times where a lens does not apply. Like the economic lens doesn't really apply to 56 to 0. That's just not a feature of how the author created that story. Historic lens doesn't really go there either. New historicism, because it's happening in our current world. So don't assume that because you've got these 5 lenses that they work in any story. It will be a challenge to use some of the lenses with some of the stories, but there will be some that really are obvious and go well. And I'll talk about the paper in a minute. I do want to talk a little bit about theme before we get there, because theme was our final textbook topic for this week. So I asked you to read that section in the textbook. Theme, I think, is one of those things that people have been working with for a long time and people misunderstand a lot. Theme, to me, is where you want to get after you're done with all of your other analysis in a text. You want to get to a theme or a main lesson about life. So why am I reading this story? What is this story adding to my experience as a human being? What am I learning from these characters and from their situations and their conflicts? And so theme, kind of like the study of literature, isn't complete until you talk about theme, because until you can bring it to the human experience, then it's not as significant or poignant as it could be. So this is kind of a short section, but they do talk about the difference between a subject and a theme, or a topic and a theme. And I think that's super important. This is one of the mistakes I see the most with students, is that they think they're writing about a theme, but they're really just writing about a subject or a topic. And I made a slide to illustrate that for you right here. That will help us. So when we say that something is a topic of a piece of literature, a poem, a play, a short story, a novel, it doesn't matter what the genre is. When we're talking about topic, we mean a word or a phrase, and it's taking the story completely down to its least common denominator. This story is about failure, if we think about 56 to 0, right? But it's also about teamwork, and it's about perseverance. Those are all topics. Those are not themes. So this week, when I ask you a formative and ask you to come up with a theme for something that we've read, I don't want you to just say a 1-word concept, because that's not a theme, that's a topic or a subject. A theme is a life lesson that we gain through reading a piece of literature. So it's going to be written in a sentence, and it's going to be a lesson that we all have to learn. In 56 to 0, Ray learns that desiring something doesn't mean that you will be able to achieve it. And that is something that not only Ray needs to learn, but we all need to learn that. It's just part of life. We're not going to get everything that we want. And so when I start thinking about the piece of literature in that broad sense, then it brings it to what we call the human condition. Every human being deals with that in life. So I want to take the ideas that are in the story and make them about life in general, and then I can gain something as a person from reading that story, if that makes sense. So topic is good, and topic can get you to theme. For example, I could say failure is the topic, and sometimes we will fail at getting something that we desired. So they're related. But when you're asked to write a theme, I want you to be thinking in a life lesson sentence. All right. I was going to make another slide, but I didn't. I think I made that point already. All right. So if we go back to the text, hopefully you added that to your notes so that whenever I ask you to write a theme, you're going in that direction. So the textbook talks about that. And then the textbook, one of the things that I like about this book is that it gives you, if you look on page 3 of the PDF, it will give you tips on how to identify themes. So they talk about how the title will sometimes give you an insight into where the theme is in the story, or sometimes there's a literal statement by the narrator or a character that is poignant. The arrangement of events, the story's central conflict, the point of view of a story, the symbols that show up, especially if they're repeated, can give you an insight into theme, and changes in a character, that character's dynamic qualities. How is that character changing from the beginning of the story to the end of the story? So I really like this. Is handy for trying to think about theme. These are all the little clues that you can use to help you pick up the theme of what the author is presenting for the human condition in the text. So later this week, when you have a formative that asks you about theme, you can go back to these pages and you can say, oh, well, let me look and see which one of these helps me figure out a life lesson that is examined in that work. So hopefully that makes sense. I know you already read the chapter. I'm just trying to highlight and explain in a different way so that it solidifies for you. Are there any questions about the chapter on theme or the examples that I've given you from our readings?
No.
Everybody's okay? All right, I'm done with that too. All right, so the last thing that we need to talk about today then is the essay. It's going to be due on the 10th of October, so you can put that on your planner. You can certainly turn it in sooner than that. I don't want you to go around thinking that you have to wait until the 10th. You know what's going on, what your other projects are, what your other assignments are, but that's about 3 weeks, 2 3/4 weeks. And it's due at the end of the day on that Saturday. So I want to go through the expectations for the essay, and if you click here where it's a link, it will take you to the details about the paper. So there are 2 papers that I have to assign you in this class as a requirement for STC. Actually, there's 2 papers and a final exam, and that's the only assignments I really need to give. But obviously I'm going to help you out and give you more grades here and there. Sorry, my throat's been scratchy from my allergies. This paper is the shorter of the 2 papers. This paper is a 4 to 5 page paper, and it is presenting an examination of one of these stories. I chose 7 stories, 7 different stories. Some of them are in the textbook and some of them are on PDF, and they hit a wide range of subject matter and styles of writing. I wanted you to pick something that you would like to read and you'd be interested in reading. So you can choose any one of these 7 stories. You're only writing about 1 story. So maybe your first step is to kind of read the beginning of each story and see which one appeals to you that you might want to do your paper on. But you can choose any one of these 7. And you're going to be writing your own interpretation of that story through one of the 5 critical lenses. So that's why it's important that you know the critical lenses. So if you choose to write about the story, The Things They Carried, which is an excerpt from a novel, you would spend some time thinking, okay, well, which are the most prominent lenses that could work with this piece? For sure, New Historicism, because that story takes place in the Vietnam War era. Probably also archetypal, because you've got the warrior. So you would just, after you read the story, you would say, okay, which one of these lenses really, really lends itself to understanding the text on a different level? So you're going to be choosing the story and choosing the lens. But it's not like everything matches up. You can't just choose one from column A and one from column B and hope that it works. You have to think about what you're reading and decide which lenses work with it. All right. Requirements. You're going to use MLA formatting, and if you need help with that, you can click here. In terms of, you know, how to set up your paper, how to do your header, how to do your margins, all of that stuff. You will put in your source, but you are only going to have one source for this paper, and that source is the story itself. This is not a paper where you are looking up what other people have said about the story. You're making your own interpretation in this paper. So you won't be using any other outside sources. You won't be looking to see what this article has to say about the story. You're going to be doing your own interpretation. So you will have a works cited, but it will only have the original source of the story, and that's it. A few other things, your paper does need to have a thesis. I'm sure that if you've survived through 1301 and 1302, that you're proficient at writing a thesis statement, but if you need help with that, crafting it, then I'll be glad to help you with that. I'm going to talk about ways that I'll help you through this process in a minute. The paper needs to be at least 4 pages, means it needs to hit the bottom of page 4 and no longer than 5 pages, not including the works cited. We add that on. So the works cited does not count as a page in the page count. Something about page count that I want to talk about that I don't think that instructors talk about very much. The assignment of pages has to do with the depth with which we want you to go into detail. So a short paper, like a 4 to 5 page paper, means I don't want a lot of depth, because if I did, I would assign a 15-page paper on the topic or a 20-page paper. So when you get an assignment for pages, the next paper is a research paper, and it's a 6 to 8 page paper. So that will be more in depth because you've got more space to develop your ideas. So when you are writing your thesis, you have to keep that in mind. You have to be thinking, I can't have a super detailed thesis with 9 parts to it because I can't finish that in 4 or 5 pages. That would be more for like a 15-page paper. So your thesis in its complexity has to match the page requirements for that assignment. And if you never thought about it that way, then that's a good way to think about it from here on out. The ideas that you present in your paper must be your own original thoughts. So it'll be you analyzing the story. Time frame. Okay, so we're starting it today. I'm assigning it, and it's due on the 10th. I do not do first drafts. I don't grade any drafts except the final. I'm not going to assign a rough draft. I'm not going to assign a first draft. I don't do that. I will look at your papers for your own benefit if you would like for me to do that up until the 5th of October. So if you wanted to work on a draft, if you wanted to work up an introduction and share it with me on Google, we can do a back and forth with feedback that way. You could also, we could set up a Zoom meeting and go through what you have for your draft, but I do not go through and mark up a first draft so that you know what to fix for a final draft. At this point, you should already know what to fix for a final draft. But if you do need that support, then I'll be glad to do that through October 5th, which is 5 days before the paper is due. If you bring me a draft on October 8th, I'm going to say, you know, do the best you can with it. So if you want to get feedback, get started on the paper, work through it, get going. And if you want to share it with me, I'll be glad to give you feedback, but that's not for a grade. Well, it's not for a grade, but I think it will help the final paper grade. if you get that feedback. So what I don't do is I don't rush to edit papers 2 days before they're due. If you want to wait until the 10th to write your paper, then that's on you and you're going to get what you get, kind of thing. Right. Okay, then I put some things on here to help you after that. So I put some thesis examples. There are 3 thesis statements here that would probably be just about right for a 4 to 5 page paper. And then they're based on stories that we've already read. So, and not the ones that are for this project, but here's one. In 56-0, T.C. Boyle uses our understanding of the archetypes of the football hero, the winning as redemption plotline, and basic features of setting to create a brutal rendering of failure that examines human futility and loss. And that's an example of the archetypal lens. So it'll be looking at that story through that lens of the archetype of the football hero and the archetype of the, you know, winning as redemption plotline that we see so frequently. So these are just examples so that you can use them to help you create your own thesis statement. There's one here from Araby that is more of a time period or new historicism lens, right? James Joyce uses his own life experiences to present a snapshot of economic depression, youthful hope, and downtrodden social classes in Dublin in the early 20th century. So I'm taking that time travel back to the early 20th century to examine Araby in its time period. And then the third one is for The Nightingale and the Rose, which I think we read for this past week. Oscar Wilde uses traditional gender roles to set up a theme about the greed, obsessed, and throwaway nature of young people. So that is the feminism and gender lens, because the young man is trying to court the young lady. She's got sort of snotty, rich girl vibes that we can see in a lot of characters. So that's the feminism gender lens. There are traditional gender roles in that story. So these are just here to help you kind of start thinking about your own thesis statement. The scoring is here, so keep in mind that there will be 2 papers, but those 2 papers together count as 40% of your overall semester grade. So I guess you could say this paper is worth 20% of the semester. So if you want to wait until the last minute, that's up to you. I'm not going to say that you won't be successful at writing a paper that way, but if you want to make sure that you're doing well, then you want to get feedback from me between now and the 5th of October. I put a whole bunch of resources on here that might be helpful to you. This first grouping here is about writing in a literary criticism kind of way, how to write analysis essay. If you've never done that, how to do MLA, formatting. There are some tips here about writing good introductions. There are some tips about incorporating quotes and then conclusions. A lot of times students will say, well, I know what I want to say, but I have trouble with my conclusion. So either you can get feedback from me, or you can also watch this video that I put on here to help you. So these are all just resources to help you through the process. And then down here are some literary analysis paper examples that I think are good examples of this type of an essay. So you can look at those papers. They're not going to be critical lens over these stories, but they're going to be literary analysis papers. So if you need an example to look at to see how somebody else set it up or how somebody else organized their thesis, etc., then there are 4 different papers that you can look at here. And then the last one is a reminder about academic integrity and making sure that your work is your own. So is there anything you want to ask me about the paper?
No, Miss, I think we're good.
You can keep unmuting just to have a conversation with me. I appreciate that. It gets a little lonely when it's just squares. Okay, so I think your first steps would be to look at the stories that are the options and try to figure out which one you're interested in working with. And then I would try to figure out which lenses apply to it. And maybe this week also write a thesis or start to work on a thesis. Next Tuesday, when I meet with you, I will probably talk about some of the resources that are down here. Maybe we'll look at an example paper. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about MLA. And in the meantime, feel free to share with me any part of this process that you want to get some feedback on. All right. I on purpose made a lighter week so that you could spend time working on your paper. So all you really need to do is just learn these other two critical lenses and work on the paper. We're going to finish with short fiction and start working on poetry while the paper is still in process. So think of the paper as the wrap-up assessment of your ability to analyze short fiction. Instead of taking a short fiction test, we're writing the paper. But this is the break week where I'm giving you less to read. Next week, they'll be reading assignments again. So, get what you can done on the paper. All right, I put the formatives in. I also put them on Google Classroom because I think that kind of helps just as reminders. Is there anything about this week that I can do? Is there something I can do to support you and help you? Unmute, no, we're good, okay.
We're good.
I knew you were gonna do that. I knew you were gonna do that. Well, maybe I'll see some of you in the next couple of weeks. I don't know, it's getting live in person with our masks on, I don't know. But
No,
if
I'm
something
staying
comes
home.
up, you're staying home?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I probably would too. I mean, if you've got the internet connection, if you're doing okay with your grades, then, I think it's gonna be like that all year. Nobody's really talking about what happens when everybody goes back to school before next year. But the good news is I'm hoping that they'll have plans for graduation that are a little different than last year since they have some more time to figure it out. All right, well, if there aren't any questions, then I'm gonna finish the meeting. If you have a question for me and you wanna stick around, you can do that. But other than that, I hope you all have a good week. I'm anxious to see what you do with the paper. All right, take
All right.
care.
Bye, Miss.
All right, see you next week. Bye. Bye.